All right, and we're back. So I will turn it back over to Terrence.
Thank you. This came up last year when we had an initial discussion about Dr. Adler, and he certainly does not shrink from making categorical statements, including maybe particularly about what's going on or not going on in the universities. So some of you may have picked up on that. So we're not sure sometimes, and we can't ask him exactly how literally he may have meant some of these things. I'm sure the word truth, well, I'm sure the word truth does turn up from time to time in universities. You probably all know that. But he doesn't shy about making a statement like that to make his point, obviously. Our speaker next is Curtis Hancock. He's a member of the Rockhurst University faculty since August of 1985. Since 1998, he's held the Joseph M. Freeman Chair in Philosophy. Among his writings, he's co-author of books How Should I Live? And the book Truth and Religious Belief, co-edited Freedom, Virtue, and the Common Good, and also Faith in the Life of the Intellect. His most recent book is Recovering a Catholic Philosophy of Elementary Education. He's in progress preparing an online course on the nature of truth, which will be titled The True, the False, the Lie, and the Fake, and that's for Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and that will be coming up next spring. He's a past president of the American Maritime Association and current president of the Gilson Society, director of the Great Books Academy, an associate of the Catholic Education Foundation, and I looked it up online, and it said Precis at the Adler.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that means.
I'm new there, so I'm hoping it doesn't involve you giving out initiations or hazing.
Maybe something like flash.
Okay.
I mean, yes.
My Latin is very rusty. He's published numerous articles and reviews on ancient and medieval philosophy, ethics, philosophy of education, metaphysics, the philosophy of religion. He's an Oklahoma native, and mentions that he was a scholar athlete back then, lettering and cross country. Those of us who weren't scholars or athletes, you guys, made it tough for all of us. His PhD's from Loyola. His dissertation was on the Aeneas of Plotinus, and his director was Leo Sweeney. And I looked up Father Sweeney, and he was, in his obituary, it's mentioned that in his final illness, for example, a lot of his former students came to visit him. And that's, to have a teacher like that is quite a gift.
Yeah, I drove up from Kansas City to Chicago to visit him. When I entered the room, there were about 10 other students.
Okay.
That were in the room.
Curtis is still running and hiking, and when he's not doing all these other activities, he's spending time with friends and family. And with that, Professor Hancock.
Okay, thank you. This is around everybody. Okay. Yeah. We'll be working hand out here. So I'm not giving a paper so much, I'm just having a conversation with you about subject matter that follows upon what Dr. Adler was talking about. I've taught philosophy of religion for 30 years, and the reaction of the students to that subject has always been somewhat predictable.
We need you up here. We need you up here.
Need you up there?
Yes. Please let me go.
You always going to walk into the horseshoe. The reaction of the students has always been somewhat predictable. There's always been a certain fraction of students who look for even an apologetics in a philosophy of religion class. They want you to give some equipment to help them defend their own faith, often their Christian faith, their Catholic faith. But from the beginning, there were always a lot of students who found that whole idea off-putting, that you would dare to suggest that one religion might be true, might have truth in the religion, as opposed to other religions. Of course, that phrase itself, truth in religion, requires some unpacking, requires some analysis because it's a rather vague or rather general expression. Nonetheless, it must have some serviceability. We saw Dr. Adler use the expression, Truth and Religion is the title of his book. But I'll comment a little bit on what that phrase, truth and religion, must mean, and then I'll return to my observations about the students. When we speak of the truth, we think of truth as being involved in judgment. There's an affirmation or a denial. You affirm a predicate of a subject, or you deny something of a subject. This table is rectangular. I'm affirming rectangularity of the table. The table is not oval. I'm denying the oval of this subject. So we normally think of truth in this judgment sense or propositional sense. And of course, in the philosophy of religion, people anticipate that you will look into religious doctrines as truth claims and you'll test them for their reasonableness. That's why it's called the philosophy of religion. You use natural reason to subject claims of revelation to philosophical analysis and to see if some truth claims can be what St. Thomas called revealabilia, or truth claims in the preambula fide, before you walk into the faith. While certain things may be taught in Revelation, they can also be examined, they can be assayed by natural reason, and independent reason can demonstrate them. The famous triad of God, freedom, and immortality comes to mind. So in a philosophy of religion class, people expect you to ask questions like, can you prove the existence of God? What about God's nature? What about the attributes of God, from infinity to divine simplicity and the like? Why is it human beings are free? What is it about our faculties and intellect and will that enable us to be free? What about immortality? Is there something about our soul that warrants that we can have hope for survival after death? So all those kinds of things captured in that triad of God, freedom, and immortality are things, doctrinal beliefs that are talked about in philosophy of religion. But there's also, as Dr. Adler observed, there's an orthopraxic sense. I think that's how he referred to it. There's a practical or prescriptive sense of truth. The kind of truth I was referring to before is theoretical or descriptive truth. I described the table such and such. But there's also a practical sense of truth in which it's not our mind conforming to fact or existence so much as to right desire, so that I can know how to live my life in the way that I ought to live by. So my behavior conforms to right conduct and right desire that informs my conduct. Now, it's this sense of truth where the rubber meets the road in the philosophy of religion course, because when you take up the practical question, you have to ask, if I were to select this religion to follow, if I were to choose the directives of this religion, would it liberate my soul? Would it fulfill me? In a word, would this religion save me as opposed to perhaps another religion? Now, the students as a whole find that suggestion that you can find salvation and greater meaning in one religion as opposed to another as rather off-putting. We live in a rather relativistic age, a pluralistic age, and they think that that's a sign of intolerance if you were to suggest that this religion might have a monopoly on truth. By truth here, we mean in this practical sense, salvation, and that other religions might be found wanting, might fall short of that. So they're more comfortable with the idea that all religions are equivalent. You know, that's why Dr. Adler subtitled his book about plurality of religions and the unity of truth. How does one assess this practical question about truth and the pursuit of one religion as salvific, suggesting other religions might not be. Okay, Robert. This has been going on, as I said, a long time, and it echoes something that Alan Bloom discussed in his book, The Closing of the American Mind. I just highlighted a few quotations because if they're instructive and they'll remind us of this kind of predisposition that students have today about relativism being equivalent to tolerance. Because the word tolerance has shifted. You see, tolerance used to mean what Voltaire meant by it. I may disagree with what you have to say, but I'll fight to the death your right to say it. But today, the suggestion is if a person is tolerant, a person won't disagree. That there are no judgments. No judgments is the watchword. And so if you dare disagree with somebody, that's a sign you're a bigot. And that's what Bloom is suggesting. That's what he's addressing. So it says, there's one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of. Almost every student entering the university believes, or says he believes, that truth is relevant. If this belief is put to the test, one can count on the student's reaction. They will be uncomprehending. That anyone should regard the proposition as not self-evident astonishes them, as though he were calling into question 2 plus 2, 2 equal to, should be 2 plus 2 equal 4. The relativity of truth is not a theoretical insight, but a moral postulate, the condition of a free society, or so they see it. That it is a moral issue for students is revealed by the character of the response when challenged. It's more of a moral issue, he says, than a theoretical issue. A combination of disbelief and indignation. Are you an absolutist, the only alternative they know? Uttered in the same tone as, are you a monarchist, or do you believe in witches? The students, of course, cannot defend their opinion. It is something with which they have been indoctrinated. The best they can do is point out all the opinions and cultures there are and have been. What right, they ask, do I or anyone else have to say one is better than the other? If I pose a routine question designed to confute them and make them think, such as, if you had been a British administrator of India, would you have let the natives under your governments burn the widow at the funeral of a man who had died? They either remain silent or reply that the British should never have been there in the first place. It is not that they know very much about other nations or about their own. The purpose of their education is not to make them scholars, but to provide them with a moral virtue, openness. So with this relativistic disposition, which they think pluralism requires, the students are more likely to accept a point of view about religion that's suggested by this old bromide, many of you I'm sure have seen it, by John Hick here. The famous elephant analogy. I printed this out for us to share as a springboard for our discussion. An elephant was brought to a group of blind men who had never encountered such an animal before. One felt a leg and reported that an elephant is a great living pillar. Another felt a trunk and reported that an elephant is a great snake. Another felt a tusk and reported that an elephant is like a sharp plowshare, and so on. And then they all quarreled together, each claiming that his own account was the truth. Notice the word truth is used here. So he's assessing the question, what is the truth in religion? And pluralism is going to be his answer. And therefore all the others false. In fact, of course, they were all true, but each referring only to one aspect of the total reality and all expressed in very imperfect analogies. So I want to ask you, what do you think of Hick's analogy here? The students, so many of them, as I said, there will always be a fraction in class who won't accept this, who will even be somewhat exclusionary in their view about salvation belongs to the Christian religion. Some will, out of sometimes old line, mainline Protestant sensibilities, will argue that you have to walk the Christian faith or you'll go to hell, and they'll even express that in class. But that's a smaller and smaller fraction. More of them will feel more comfortable in this kind of pluralistic position of John Hick's. But notice I asked some questions to provoke our conversation. How might one interpret the expression truth in religion? I've already given some idea of how to do that. Does professing that a religion is true imply that the members of that religious communion are superior to members of different religions? So that's one of the things that makes people uncomfortable. They think, well, if you hold your religion is true, and you say there's falsehood in other religions, are you saying there's no truth in other religions? Are you saying that your people in your religion are morally superior to people in other religions? What answer or answers could one of the men in the above illustration give to undermine the purpose of Hick's analogy? See, I think that's a very delicious question when you think about it. Because what could you say? You see, Hick sets it up in a certain way that they all respond with a kind of partial perspective. They have a kind of perspectival view of their response to the elephant. But what could you say that I think would completely flummox Hick? Reverend McVeigh, you're one of the men feeling the elephant. What could you say to say something different in kind that would seem to foil Hick's strategy by this example. Excuse me.
There's a big picture here, we can't get our hands quite around it.
Okay, and that would be what? Which is interesting because Hick knows this himself. He knows this when he sets up the example, which is often what happens with this kind of relativistic shtick. There's usually a device involved.
All touchy traits of something.
Yeah? And what is that something?
All blank, aren't they?
Yeah. Greg, right?
Yes, I mean, one of the things that occurs to me is when they're feeling these things, they can perhaps feel that it's okay, that
Mhm.
it's a creature.
As opposed to being inorganic, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. What though would be the $64,000 answer that it seems to me would put Hick in an impossibly defensive position? And this is what's all the more ironic about this is Hick knows this. Hick already has the answer, but he won't allow that answer in his presentation, and that is what?
Seems like it's denying revelation.
Okay, now yeah, that's it.
If everybody's reaching out to the
Yes.
elephant, there's no sense of the elephants reaching out to them, which is dogs.
Yeah, I think you're on track for me here. Like, what if I were to say that, well, it was revealed to me that this is an elephant? That this is an elephant. And I got that by revelation. So wouldn't my religion be true and the others only partially true and pretty much metaphorical?
Yeah.
Well, then it seems to me Hick has to deal with that. And also, you'll notice Hick knows it's an elephant. So this is what these relativists often do. They will tell you that you're never entitled to any kind of certain perspective about things, that all perspectives are paradigmatic or relativistic. They all get washed out in relativistic pluralism. And yet somehow they get to have the authoritative interpretation. Have you ever noticed that? There's a guy named Paul Strathern, wrote a book called Aristotle in 90 Minutes. Clever little book. I read it last year. I used it in one of my classes. It's a nifty little read, and on the whole, it's a pretty effective and constructive account of Aristotle. I think I read it in 2 hours because I moved my lips when I read it, in spite of the title. But he, at the end of the book, after giving this nice presentation of Aristotle, at the end of the book, he can't help himself. And he says, poor old Aristotle, as good as he was, in the end, he had a failed philosophy. You know why? Because he was so naive as to think that you could actually grasp the truth. You could know mind-independent realities. He didn't realize that our minds are hopelessly imprisoned in our own paradigms. You can never get outside your own paradigm to judge another paradigm. Now, you catch the irony there? Strathern gets to step outside his paradigm to judge old Aristotle, but nobody else can do that. Now, it seems to me that Hick is doing something like that. And so if you declare, as Ron said, that there can be a revealed religion, then doesn't that put Hick's paradigm on the defense? At least it's a question I think Hick, in all honesty, would have to feel. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the particular interesting things about this parable is that it comes from one historical religions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Listen, word for word, out
Yeah.
whereby privilege is that.
Yeah. So again, a case where it may be asserting precisely what he's calling into question or denying. Yeah. Sometimes I think there's a strategy in which, as I said, relativism is often a device. Pluralism is often a device to insinuate actually that you have a preferred, favored, perhaps even an absolutist position. That's why I mentioned here this passage from the Dalai Lama. I quoted it here because I'll assign my students some readings in the textbook. One will be by Karl Rahner, who has an inclusivist view, Alvin Plantinga, who has an exclusivist view, and then there's the Dalai Lama and Hick, who have a pluralistic view, and the students adjudicate these different positions. Notice how the Dalai Lama handles it, having said some things about what matters are not religious differences, but rather the fact that all religions aim at transforming persons so that they can achieve permanent human happiness. Then he says this. So he pushes the pluralistic pose, and yet what does he really say? We Buddhists ourselves will not be liberated at once. In our own case, it will take time. Gradually, we will be able to reach moksha or nirvana, but the majority of Buddhists will not achieve this within their own lifetimes. So there's no hurry. If Buddhists themselves have to wait perhaps many lifetimes for their goal, why should we expect that it be different for non-Buddhists? So you see, nothing much can be done. So it sounds very pluralistic, but what's he really doing there, Jude?
And what? Should we even ask, is religion true? I think it would be helpful. And I'm wondering if you really good, and it's distinguish between philosophy of God and philosophy of religion.
Right.
But you are not the same.
Yeah. Yeah, in our curriculum, we have a philosophy of God course and a philosophy of religion course. So it's an important distinction.
You're in the philosophy of God.
Mm-hmm.
You can begin with evidence of God. How he designated itself. I mean, there can be as a divine science. And that's one thing. But that's not religion.
Mm-hmm.
Religion is a sociological theory.
Right.
It's a artifact, and the God exists or not, and then we do religion. Religion is built up from certain insights. Now, insights which I would place in the philosophy of God may be true or not. Plato reason for self-thinking, or there's that reason for self-thinking. Plato to assume more. Aristotle, the reason to a lot of attributes, which when the Christian fathers working off the Gospels, he found all that stuff useful. We found that they could talk about what they assumed had been revealed. Intelligently, and with the consistency that you were talking about earlier. But to ask, is your religion true or is that true? I don't think that makes sense.
So you would object to Dr. Adler's title to his book?
Religion is cultural, can be examined, and it may be a culture reflecting something that is known independently of any revelation. To look at Buddhism, there's no God in Buddhism, there's no God in Confucianism. We talk about them as if they were religions. But this religion has something to do with worship of the divine. Religion, after all, is a Latin term. So I think there are two things that need to be sorted out.
Yeah,
and I think the distinction when we talk about God and talk about religion are two different.
But isn't there doctrinal content in religion? They're not just irreducibly sociological, are they?
Well, of course not.
Yeah, and so to that extent, it seems you can sequester out certain doctrinal claims in the religion, and you can examine those, and then you can ask that overall practical question: Would I get closer to, by these doctrinal truths, get closer to personal fulfillment, liberation, and salvation than have I embraced these doctrinal claims? For example, Christianity says the most important thing in reality is the person. God is a trinity of persons. Human beings are persons. We're made in the image and likeness of God. Personhood counts. But in Buddhism, personhood is a pathology. You have a self, that's the source of unhappiness and misery. You have to transcend the self. Okay, what do you do with this kind of conflict? It seems to me someone like Hick can't deal with conflicts like this because it all just gets washed out in this nondescript pluralism. But those kind of conflicts and contradictions cry out for philosophical, theological assessment. And I think that's more than just sociological, isn't it? Yeah. But it certainly is. part of the story. And that's why Hicks' example resonates, because he does capture that sociological dimension of religion and what is sociology, but very pluralistic. And so that's the powerful truth in what he's talking about. But it's part of the story, I think, not the whole story. Yeah.
Would you say that underlying Adler's interview with Buckley on whether or not all religions are equal is an understanding of the human person, as well as an understanding of happiness? That the argument about whether or not you have an equality or inequality in relationship to religions doctrinally here. Wouldn't that depend upon a unity with respect to understanding what human nature is, and with respect to human happiness? And so you would be able to measure the superiority or lack of superiority of a religion from the standpoint of possessing truth analogously, on the basis of there being a transcultural understanding of human nature, and what Adler would call transcultural and global, as well as a unity of truth. So if you don't accept the unity of truth, and if you don't accept a specific understanding of the human being, which Adler seemed to have held consistently throughout his professional career, that he didn't buy into the modern understanding of human nature, that he held a classical understanding of the human person. If you reject that classical understanding of the human person, you got a problem. And you reject the unity of truth, how are you going to be able to solve this problem? In other words, doesn't the question he's asking basically presuppose you want to enter this debate, you have to have a common understanding of what a human being is, and you have to understand have a common understanding of human happiness.
Well, I think there are many ways to look at that, answer that. But I remember Jacques Maritain's answer. He reminds us that in Scripture, an idea, including a philosophy and a religion, any human work is tested by its fruits. And one of the things he said Christianity has going for it, if you look at the arc of history, Christianity, because of that commitment to the philosophy of the human person that it has, the dignity of the human person, democracy came out of that, science came out of that, the view that God as a person didn't create the universe necessarily, but as a choice. That means the universe is radically contingent, and so you can't prejudge what science can determine. Earlier theology snuffed out science, physical science I mean here, because they already had the answers, because it's all done in primary causes. Secondary causes didn't count because their view of God was a creationist in that way. So we already have the answers. We just connect with God, and he tells us we don't need experiment or empirical observation and the like. But Christianity was open to that because it had simply a different metaphysics, a contingent creationist metaphysics, because God is free, he's a person. And also, of course, so it's science, and then democracy came out of that. The whole legacy, I guess, of the human person. Maritain emphasizes that.
Isn't this the real issue, though? I mean, the issue Adler is discussing in a way is secondary.
Yeah.
That the fundamental issue is there a unity of truth? And is there a unity with respect to human understanding about what human nature is? You can't solve this problem.
Yeah. Because the human person needs God to fulfill.
No, unless you have a common opinion about what human beings are, and what human happiness is, how can you debate the question?
So theology really depends on a kind of philosophical anthropology,
or something preceding, even more primitive than that, a common sense understanding of what human beings are, that we have adequate faculties by means of which we can apprehend.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight, and it's one measure by which we can look at different religions and test them.
If you don't think there's a unity of truth, how are you possibly going to admit that there's unity in religion?
Yeah.
Or in inequality?
Yeah, that's why the whole question of conflict and contradiction in religion is important because you can't just pretend that contradictory claims can both be accepted, which is one of the things the pluralist wants to say, which means there's something illogical about pluralism in that sense. How can you say monotheism is true, another religion says no, polytheism is true, and accept those both? Contraries can't both be true. And they could be both false, there might not be a God at all. But if you accept there's a God, one or the other stands. Yeah, Jude?
If I may follow up with it, I think this is very important. Let me give you a practical example of the absence of planned learning during the war. Years ago, I was called in to resolve a conflict. The law, actually then instituted,
Yeah.
was functioning in the District of Columbia. And it was denied a license to continue. I was called in as head of a committee of three. The one guy in sciences was from Boston University, another in biology from a local university. So it forced me to study Buddhism. Now, I don't think you will find a concept of person in Buddhism, or even in Confucianism. There is an implicit concept of human nature, but the notion of person, I think, is distinctly blessed. Well, let me tell you what happened with my investigation. It went on for weeks. And interviewed the faculty, the entire faculty of the Institute, which owned a good piece of property in downtown Washington. Every one of those faculty members had a degree in physics or mathematics in places like MIT, Caltech, Harvard. Every one had a PhD in sciences. And there was very little philosophy apparent, certainly no Western philosophy apparent in their basic teachings. Well, I got them off. They got their license, and then they left walking. But the people on the BC Licensure Commission, I had worked with them many times. They're, without any excuse whatsoever, are passing on educational enterprise in Iowa, in Washington. They won't touch places like Georgetown, UW, or Catholic, but the ignorance of people who are called to judge our educational institutions is appalling.
You know, more than once in Dr. Adler's work, he speaks to the fact that in some of these Asian religions, they seem blithely indifferent to the possibility of contradictions with regard to some of their religious claims and some of their sociological claims and some of their scientific claims. And Dr. Adler talked about how they're willing to compartmentalize truth, say in science, versus truth in a truth claim in their religion. And I remember Dr. Adler replied to one of them at the Aspen Institute one time that, does it matter to you that you flew from Tokyo to Colorado for the Aspen Institute meeting on a mechanically sound airplane? If contradictions don't matter, does it matter whether you fly on a mechanically sound or a mechanically unsound airplane? And so I think maybe some immersion in Western logic might force that discussion. And so you're talking about the dearth of a philosophical education. Just might make them indifferent to those kinds of considerations. Yeah, Bill?
I find that the students, I taught an MBA program, so it's a different atmosphere, but if you scratch beyond the relativism and tolerance and so forth, but you really have a radical consequence of practice. Okay? And so their answer to your question, I will tell you the truth is, what religion brings the greatest amount of happiness to people and solves the greatest amount of problem? That seems to be the major criteria for holding young people who use it.
Yeah.
It's the
That's why
measure
Dr.
of
Red asked you.
the utility of the religion. What religion is doing most to help people, to feed, to build houses and so forth, and to make it a better world. That's the criteria. Truth, I think, that's dominant in things today.
Yeah.
It's not just the power. They say what works best and what keeps people oppressed and what stops people from flourishing. That's truth. It's an ethical issue.
And you'll notice relativists will usually harbor all kinds of absolutist judgments. I remember I had a woman in my class a few years ago. She beleaguered the class all semester with relativism. She was the defender of relativism. One night after class, we all walked out to the parking lot together, and I started laughing because I saw in her van, in her a bumper sticker on her van, Amnesty International.
Yeah.
She worked for Amnesty International. How could you be a relativist? You don't believe there are any universal human rights and work for Amnesty International, which is a watchdog organization to ferret out abuse of human rights. This that compartmentalization. You see.
Most of the young people don't realize that you do remember the set of principles worked out. What they think is a criteria of truth. And very often those principles are very pragmatic principles. And they do have principles and criteria of truth that they somehow have picked up. And that's what the confrontation has to be. What is your criteria of truth? What is your criteria of judgment?
Well, the relativist says no judgments, but the relativism is itself a judgment. And the relativist will often say, well, you should be a relativist so you'll be tolerant. But tolerance is also a judgment. You're judging that it's universally better for all the human race to be tolerant, right? So it's another one of these incoherences. Jude, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
Well, I was endorsing your view. I don't know whether the utility is right, but certainly, what makes a happy life, what view of the world makes a happy life. And of course, in the view of Christianity, you have the revelation of truths that are inaccessible to reason alone. But if you are steeped in what also we call divine science, those truths can be revelated. And a Catholic, of course, and we used to teach in our schools, Christ came in the fullness of time. When the intellect of the West was prepared to receive the truths of divine revelation.
So there was a history behind that. That prepared that. Let me just make one closing remark. Just wanted to tell the final lesson here about the Dalai Lama's quotation. You notice what the Dalai Lama is doing here. He talks like a pluralist, but he actually is advocating Buddhism triumphant. If you read between the lines here, he's basically saying, well, because of reincarnation, everybody else in every other religion is going to get the chance to be a Buddhist. But he talks like all religions are equivalent. But because of the doctrine of reincarnation, he insinuates here that in the end, Buddhism tells the story. That's the final lesson about the plurality of religion. So again, often the relativism and the pluralism is a device to actually insinuate a favored view. And you think you have to watch that kind of thing. It may be perfectly genuine what he's doing here, but upon philosophical analysis, it seems like it's not consistent with bona fide pluralism.
Good. Well, I'll turn it over now to Peter Redpath, and he'll introduce the next session.
Thank you, Terry. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Father Pavel Tarashevitz, who is from Poland, from Missouri in Poland, not Missouri in the United States, and who's been was affiliated for a number of years with the Catholic University of Lublin, and is now a fellow at the Outer Aquinas Institute. He's also the editor of the Studio Gilsoniana that is published out of Warsaw. and he's also a member of the International Anti-Angioson Society. And he's going to introduce the speakers for the next session. Father Powell?
Thank you very much, Dr. Redpath, for introducing the introducer. My task, I suppose, I presume, is to give floor to our prominent speakers. So first of them is going to be Benjamin Block. Benjamin Block is affiliated to Catholic University of America, Washington, D.C. He's going to talk about confirmation and the evidentialist objection against Christianity. It sounds very serious. I hope we recognize in this gentleman an expert in many things just mentioned by the title, especially evidentialism. I'm very, very interested in that very notion. So please, floor is yours. Give it.
So my presentation is basically going to be Aquinas' answer to these same questions that Mortimer Adler and William Buckley were talking about. So I have a handout here on both sides. Basically just selections from Thomas Aquinas that I think will kind of guide the discussion here. So one of the most common objections against religion in general, but in particular against the Christian religion, is the evidentialist objection. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it basically consists of two rather powerful premises, actually. First of all, they say that it's wrong, or at least unreasonable, to believe what does not have sufficient evidence. And that seems to make sense. And secondly, because we hold the truths of Christian faith by faith and not by reason, the second premise is that there is insufficient evidence to believe the truths of the Christian faith. And therefore, it's unreasonable or wrong to believe the truths of the Christian faith. And I want to discuss Aquinas' position because I think for us in academia in particular, it's very easy to become over-rationalistic about these things. We tend to be very apologetic and very philosophically want to give reasons for everything we say. And I think Aquinas is sort of a preventive medicine, if you will, against being too rationalistic when it comes to things, when it comes to matters of the faith. Because as I hope to show today, even in the acts that are prior to the faith, there still has to be the grace of God in Aquinas' position. So immediately here, I just want to exclude two extremes. Two extremes that no Christian can actually hold. So first of all, when it comes to the articles of faith themselves, so doctrines such as the Trinity or the Incarnation, we cannot make reason the judge of these truths. Faith, by definition, is the conviction of things that are unseen. So our reason does not have access to these truths of the faith, the articles of faith. I'm not talking about the preambles of the faith here, but the reason can't access the truths of faith themselves. So if we try to make reason the judge of doctrines such as the Trinity or the Incarnation, it's going to fail. It does not have access to these truths. So that's the first extreme position we have to exclude immediately. Secondly, we have to exclude fideism. I'm just basing myself on the authority of St. Peter here, but for the Christian religion, you need to be able to give an account. You need to be able to give a defense for the hope that is within you. We don't hold the truths of the Christian faith lightly. So there's going to be some reasonability to the faith itself. We don't hold the truths of the faith for no reason at all. So with that being said, there's two things that I want us to keep in mind throughout this discussion of what Aquinas says. First of all, we have to hold that the truths of faith are themselves inaccessible to reason. And secondly, we have to hold that it's reasonable or justifiable to believe in the Christian faith. So for Aquinas, even though the truths of faith are themselves inaccessible to human reason, he still holds that there is a reason why we can believe what is above reason. And the reason why we can believe what is above reason is because these are truths that are given to us by God. And Aquinas says we should not believe what is above reason unless it is God revealed. And immediately here, we should see that there's a problem here. It just seems like he's moved the problem one step back. Well, how does one know that it's actually God revealing? And when it comes to answering the question, how do we know whether it's God revealing these truths that are inaccessible to reason, there's a wide spectrum of views about how one understands that it's actually God revealing. The evidentialists, and I'm thinking chiefly here of people such as Richard Swinburne. He's a contemporary philosopher. He's following positions of philosophers such as John Locke. Evidentialists hold that it's reason itself that is the means by which we determine if it's actually God revealed. So we have this testimony that's given to us. These people are saying it's from God. How do we determine whether it's from God? Well, we simply apply our reason. Is it more likely than not that it's God revealing? If it's more likely than not that it's God revealing, then we can submit our intellects to what's being revealed and accept the content. And that is faith for the evidentialists. So it's purely a matter of the reason itself making the judgments about whether it's God revealing. So Richard Swinburne says, we need to take steps to acquire beliefs as probably true, that is, as rationally well supported as we can get them. And following on the John Locke, whether it be a divine revelation or no, reason must judge. Now, it's pretty clear that whatever you feel about this position, this is not Aquinas' position. Aquinas is very anti-evidentialist. So here's just some quotes from the Summa here. When someone either does not have the will or does not have the prompt will to believe, unless he is induced by human reason, being thus led by human reason diminishes the merits of faith. And a little bit later on in the Summa, but he has the more perfect faith who does not require helps of this kind to believe. Hence, to disclose the lack of faith in some, the Lord says, unless you see signs and wonders, you do not believe. And from this it can be understood that those who are so prompt of spirit that they believe God even without beholding signs, these are blessed in comparison to those who do not believe unless they see such things. So for Aquinas, it's at least wrong to demand human reasons before you believe revelation is from God. For Aquinas, human reasons are at least unnecessary and unfitting for believing that this revelation is from God. And that doesn't mean that he holds there's no reason why we believe revelation is from God, but it does mean that it's not a pure matter of reason alone. So at least Swinburne and Locke, and people like them, the evidentialists, they're at least wrong, according to Aquinas, to say that it's our epistemic duty to make the truths of faith to make the revelation of God more reasonable than not using human reason alone. So what is Aquinas' positive position? I'm going to look at a couple of different works of Aquinas. I'm going to look at chapter 6 of the Summa Contra Gentiles, but most especially his commentary on the Gospel of St. John. Aquinas isn't responding to the evidentialist objection directly, so we're going to have to extract what he says in various works in order to try to get at what Aquinas would say, why it is justifiable or reasonable to believe the truths of the Christian faith. My proposal is that Aquinas distinguishes between two kinds of divine confirmation. So revelation is strengthened, it's confirmed in various ways according to Aquinas. And if we distinguish between two different kinds of confirmation, as Aquinas does, what I hope to show here is that one kind of confirmation is necessary, and one kind of confirmation of the faith is not necessary. So in the Summa Contra Gentiles, chapter 6, Aquinas is trying to show that Christians don't hold their faith lightly. And he says, divine wisdom manifests its own presence and the truth of its teaching and inspiration by fitting arguments. In order to confirm that which exceeds natural knowledge, it, divine wisdom, visibly manifests works that surpass the ability of all nature. And then he gives examples of confirmation. So, raising of the dead, healing of the sick, miraculous signs in the heavens. But he continues with one final example. And what is even more wonderful, the inspiration of human minds, so that the simple and uneducated, filled with the gift of the Holy Spirit, reach in an instant the highest wisdom and eloquence. What he's saying here is that the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, this internal confirmation, is also a kind of strengthening of our faith. That's also a means we have by which we can recognize that it is God revealed. And here he's following St. Paul, or the author of the Hebrews, where St. Paul, or the author of the Hebrews, says that God confirmed the truths of faith to men, bearing witness by signs and wonders and various miracles, and by the gifts of the Holy Spirit, distributed according to his own will. So in other words, both sensible signs, miracles, and the workings of the Holy Spirit are different kinds of divine confirmation, which is a manifestation of God in his power and truth. There are many other passages throughout Aquinas where he makes this same division. In the Summa, where he's talking about faith, he says, he who believes does have sufficient motive to believe, for he is moved by the authority of the divine teaching confirmed by miracles, and what is more, by the interior instinct of God inviting, and hence he does not believe lightly. So if we look to his commentary on the Gospel of John, again, we can find he makes this distinction between two different kinds of confirmation, the internal working and the external working of sensible signs. But here, especially in the commentary on John, he's very clear that reliance upon sensible signs is not a good thing in itself, and it's certainly not required. We should believe readily without depending upon human science, without basing our belief upon human reason. So human reason is involved, but we don't base our belief upon human reason. And even more than that, especially in this commentary, Aquinas is clear that the internal confirmation is absolutely necessary for everyone, because we don't want to believe the truths of faith we like. So I have some examples here. When he explains the passage from John 15:24, if I had not done among them the works which no one else did, they would not have sin. When St. Thomas explains that passage, he makes it clear that the works here refer to both exterior and interior manifestations of God. Quote, but it must be noticed that Christ attracts by word, by signs both visible and invisible, namely the moving and stirring of hearts from within. This interior instinct is therefore the work of God for acting well, and he who resists it sins. This passage must be understood not only of what is visible, but also the interior instinct and the attraction of the teaching. If indeed this had not been done among them, they would have no sin. So that makes it clear that it would not be true to say that no confirmation is necessary at all. Through the works of God, so that's both the external and the internal works, we are led to a knowledge of him. And it's in that our salvation consists. But it is placing the emphasis upon the internal confirmation. So a little further on, when he's discussing the doubting of St. Thomas the Apostle, Aquinas notes that, in fact, it would have been excusable enough if he, St. Thomas the Apostle, had not believed immediately. Because as it says in Sirach, he who believes quickly is light in heart. So the sin of St. Thomas the Apostle is not in his discerning whether or not the revelation is from God. But instead, Aquinas locates the sin in the hardness of heart, which he identifies with not wanting to believe except by sensible proof. So it's the type of confirmation that is the sensible proof that is unnecessary, that is a sign of our weakness. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what that internal calling is, that internal confirmation actually is for Aquinas. But before I get there, I want to forestall an objection that somebody could possibly bring against this position, because you could say, okay, hasn't Aquinas just moved the problem one step back? So why do I believe the truths of the faith? Because God reveals them. Well, how do I know it's God revealing? Well, because of this internal instinct. Isn't it reason that makes the judgment about whether I have this internal instinct or not? Doesn't it ultimately come back to reason? And the response to this objection is, well, in some way, the evidentialists are correct in as much as you do need to have a reason, but where they go wrong is precisely in thinking that it's human reason alone which adjudicates whether or not revelation is from God. For Aquinas, there has to be this act of grace. So, again, looking at his commentary on John, Aquinas says, truly no one can come unless drawn by the Father. The human heart of itself tends to what is inferior and is unable to rise to what is above unless it is drawn. But if it does not rise up, this is not a failure on the part of the one who draws, who in himself fails no one, but rather this is because of an impediment belonging to the one who is not drawn. In the state of uncorrupted nature, there was no impediment preventing one from being drawn up, and hence all men could participate in it. But in corrupted nature, all are equally held back from this drawing by the impediment of sin, and therefore all need to be drawn up. But God, inasmuch as it depends on him, extends his hand to draw everyone. So this is a really important passage because it shows that there's, even before the act of belief itself, even before the act of faith, there's need for God's grace to act here. And why is that? Why is there a need to act, for God's grace to act? Because of sin. Sin blinds men. It corrupts our heart so that we are unable to accept the truths of the faith as good, as desirable, and unable to accept them as certain. So if one hasn't had this prior change in the heart, no matter how carefully you investigate the things of God, you'll never be able to arrive at the act of faith. Now, without this reorientation of the heart, it would be possible, at least in theory, to come to the conclusion that it's probably God revealing. And this is the sort of belief that evil spirits have. But this is not inclination to the act of faith as such. Because faith, the act of faith, is a certain assent to God's revelation made through the wills being directed to the higher good. So, again, a quote from the Summa in the Secunda Secundae, where we're talking about faith. Aquinas says, faith, which is the gift of grace, inclines man to believe according to some affection for the good, even if it's unformed, even if it's lifeless faith. Hence, the faith which is in the demons is not a gift of grace, but rather they are compelled to believe from the shrewdness of their natural intellect. And again, in the De Veritate, question 14, Aquinas confirms that the so-called faith of the demons is belief that is not assented to by the will. So they see that this revelation is probably from God, but they don't see that the revelation is actually good. And in order to see the revelation as something that is actually good, and as something that is certain, one needs to have one's will, one's heart, reoriented towards God. Lastly, I want to conclude here with talking about how this reorientation of the human will takes place for Aquinas. Again, looking at his commentary on the Gospel of John, Aquinas says that the Father draws people to himself in various ways. Men are of diverse conditions, and so he uses the external signs and the internal confirmation, this internal drawing to himself. And he uses that in various ways according to everyone's particular disposition. But that being said, those who believe because of the teaching are more commendable, for they are more spiritual than those who believe because of signs, who are coarser and more on the level of sense. So in both these cases, there's always going to be this internal confirmation, this internal drawing of the Holy Spirit. And in some people, it's going to involve reference to external signs. But the reference to external signs is unnecessary. And again, it's a sign of weakness and imperfection that we need to appeal to human reasons. So what is this broader picture of revelation and of confirmation help us to understand in regard to the evidential subjection? Well, it shows that for Aquinas, it is reasonable to accept the truths of faith because we have this internal confirmation. We don't hold the truths of faith for no reason at all. However, it also doesn't let coming to faith be a matter of pure human effort. Instead, one is only capable of grasping the truths of the invisible truths with an act of faith if prior to that, one allows one's heart to be moved interiorly by the grace of God. And in fact, Aquinas says that one would not incur any guilt if one refused to believe solely on the basis of external miracles. He says, for if we speak of whatever miracles, they would have excuse if they had not been done among them by Christ. For no one is able to come to Christ through faith unless he is drawn. Therefore, if no one had drawn them to faith, they would be excused for their unbelief. So it's still reasonable and justifiable, inasmuch as it's not made lightly, but it is made by the light of divine confirmation, which again takes many forms tailored to each individual, but which always and necessarily is going to involve this reshaping of the human heart so that it has a desire for higher things. So even before the act of faith, then, the Word needs to disclose himself to our inmost being. And thus, the saying is true that we love because he first loved us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bloch. My proposal is to have two presentations first, and then to release the discussion. So the next presenter, the next speaker is to be William McVeigh, who is affiliated to the Aquinas Institute. And the title of his presentation makes me feeling uncertain because when I put together spirituality and religiosity, so I think they are very close to each other. But in the title of the presentation we are going to have, we find what? Aquinas and Alcoholic Anonymous. I am spiritual, but not religious. So please explain yourself. This is our next speaker.
First of all, I want to say it's nice to be here because, you know, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Kansas and Missouri, and we don't meet. Being here with a bunch of Thomists, I feel like the two Mormons who were going from door to door in Missouri in a small town, trying to introduce people to the Church of Mormon. And they came to this good old boy's door, and they knocked on the door, and they said, "We're with the Church of Mormon. Would you be interested?" And he said, "Oh, come in, sit down." I just made a fresh batch of coffee, and my wife made some chocolate chip cookies. Sit down. Sit down. So he gets the cookies and the coffees, and these two young, enthusiastic Mormons are sitting there, and he stares at them. He said, "Okay, guys, what are we going to talk about?" And they said, "I don't know. We've never been asked in before." So I don't get to talk about Thomism to anybody in the Midwest, so it's nice to be invited to come in and talk about Thomas Aquinas here. I'm Bill McVeigh. A lot of times I have to be very careful at meetings or church meetings or business meetings, and I introduce myself because I'm always trying to say, "I'm Bill McVeigh and I'm an alcoholic." I'm going to talk about spirituality from AA, which I'm very familiar with because for 20 years I've been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm still very active in Alcoholics Anonymous. I also am a part-time Episcopal priest. I have a parish which has a large recovery program attached to it, and I had a similar program in Sedalia, Missouri, and worked with various 12-step programs. So I've got some experience. I'm going to talk from that background. So most of my study of alcoholism was under Dr. Jack Daniel and Dr. Smirnoff. Okay, that's where I became an expert in the disease. It's this disease of the soul. I don't buy into the medical disease model of alcoholism, but I see it as a disease, a spiritual disease. So that's a little bit of my background. The other thing is, I meet a lot of people in AA who will say to me, this is how they say it, I am spiritual, but I am not religious. I mean, they take a great deal of pride in stressing that. So I face that more and more now. Father, I'm spiritual, but I'm definitely not religious. It's like they have taken an inoculation against religion, and that's what's happening. People are inoculating themselves against Western religion. And it's said with a great deal of, so they come into AA. So I call them the spiritual but not religious types. This is the fastest growing thing today that we are facing in evangelism. So it's good to look at AA because these are sincere people, you know. They're really working at spirituality. It's not like they watch Oprah once in a while. These are people who are pursuing God. So let's talk about that a little bit and see what we learn from that. And I'll try to get time to make some conclusions at the end. The subject matter, I call them, this is what I think is a paper in spiritual psychology of Thomas Aquinas, looking at AA from just sitting at a lot of meetings and listening to people talk and watch them in recovery. The subject matter of psychology, properly conceived, is man, his nature, his powers, and habits. And from Dr. Redpath, the nice little book I read, the Moral Wisdom of St. Thomas, he writes, to us, the reality of ethics rests upon the reality of a power psychology. How moral activity can belong to human beings, how it can be a human activity, unless it issues from a power psychology. So I really liked that the first time I read it, because I've spent the last 20 years talking to people saying that you have to have a power greater than yourself. That's where you have to start. So if there is a relation between ethics and a power psychology, then there's a relationship, I think, between moral philosophy and moral psychology. It was a perplexing issue because from the early days of recovery, I realized that AA is a program, they say, of spiritual recovery. I soon began to realize after my first year in AA that my old days in seminary were coming back. It was mostly a program of moral transformation and moral recovery. It demands in the early steps, or the early principles you might call them, the recovering individual comes to a personal stress, personal definition of God. Jude hit it right on the head when he started there. He said he looked at Buddhism and so forth, and the word person didn't appear. That's big in AA. You're personal. As a person, you must make a decision for God. The definition must not be an abstract definition of God. Rather, must be defined as an experiential dynamic power in the life of a person recovering. It is a God greater than the self, and the recovering individual must admit that he, she is unable to recover without the power of their God. The first three steps of AA are about discovering an all-powerful God who is beyond the skull of our brain. It's a finite person trying to understand an infinite being. That's the power of the program. It's clear in the book in AA. And most important, the discovery and acceptance must be of a powerful God to whom the recovering person is willing to turn his or her life over to. The first three steps. One, we admit it. We, not I, we. That becomes important in a few minutes. We're powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Okay? We stress the unmanageable. Two, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. You have to admit in AA that you're a whack job when you come in. Okay, that's very important. That's the beginning of recovery. Shame and admitting you're a whack job. And three, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. AA people say that they are spiritual and not religious. There are no altar calls, no confessions of sins, and no testimonies. Just a quiet, completely quiet, turning their life over to the care of God in all matters and trust a loving and personal God. This God is defined in a wide variety of expressions, from pantheists to Buddhists to the all-sovereign Christian God. But the bottom line is that it is a personal relationship with God who can and will if he is sought. Exercise of will. It is a spiritual journey that has culminated in step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. It is an intense and daily belief in the healing power of God. It is a fundamental state of belief that it is the experience of those who follow the steps that God can and will heal if he is sought. The emphasis is strongly on the sought, because healing is understood as a daily reprieve from addiction by the power of God.
It seems for AA, spiritual, not religious types, that being spiritual means an individual experiences and maintains through prayer and meditation a personal healing relationship with God. So the question arises, does not traditional religion bring healing to the sick and the suffering? How is AA spirituality different? How is 12-step programs? Well, first of all, spirituality of healing deals with insanity. The loss of sanity, therefore, demands a method of spirituality where God is sought on a daily basis through prayer, examination of conscience. Most people who practice traditional religion would not perceive themselves as insane or having lost their minds. Most practitioners and ministers and followers of traditional religion would see themselves as having blemishes, venial sins, somewhat of a sinner, but not totally insane or a whack job. But they would not have the major defects of character requiring intense spiritual healing. Religious people will ask for prayers from physical healing or come up to the altar for that, but seldom does a person ask for prayers because they're losing their mind or suffering from mental obsessions. I got that part of my life put together. Okay? That's always the case. It means I have a spirituality grounded on a dynamic relationship with an all-loving, healing God. The spirituality is often expressed with this common AA aphorism. Religion is for people who are afraid of hell, and spirituality is for people who have been there. It is a Thomistic concept of power that is the foundation of 12-step recovery. This power we might today call a force, and everything other than God exists by means of a force which St. Thomas calls its act of existing, its esse, which is not a self-containing act. In AA, spirituality is stated quite simply as this: there is a God, and you're not him. Good orderly direction. From the beginning in an AA program, people are told it is a spiritual program and they must begin to work the steps. I'll call them principles or virtues. You must define a relationship with a higher power, and you must know as God. It is a program, get God or get drunk. And despite the state of your belief, pray the Serenity Prayer daily and frequently, and make a decision to begin to put good orderly direction in your life. So just an aside, if I'm working with a new person in the program, especially a very educated person, and you'll say, well, I don't believe in God. So I don't care. You still got to pray every day. I said, well, but what? I said, your way hasn't been working. You'll do what you're told. You say the Serenity Prayer whether you believe in God or not, okay? Well, how do I start doing this? You have a cell phone? Yes. Put it under your bed every night. Why? Because on your knees, you can find it in the morning. That's a good start, and that'll remind you. But you have to say a prayer at night, and you have to say a prayer in the evening. That's baseline for a start. Otherwise, get another sponsor. I can't help you. Or go back out and do some more research. Here's $10. Go buy yourself a bottle, okay? We are created as a free person by God because it is only by the exercise of free choice for God that we demonstrate our love. It is the suffering that is an integral part of the free journey with God. We do not initially come to God by means of a clear decision of the intellect. Rather, we come to God through a life of struggling to be just a half-decent person. I always tell people, don't try to be a saint. You won't make it. Just don't be a jerk. Just act like a half-decent person and let sainthood sneak up on you if it can. It is as we live virtuously that God becomes more vivid and dynamic. I, like other recovering alcoholics, have come to God because in the midst of suffering and the need for healing, I decided to become a half-decent human being. I wanted God, so I engaged in a lifestyle of good, orderly direction. And God slowly, once again, became personal and a dynamic force. I want to suggest when AA individuals state that they are spiritual but not religious, they are attempting to articulate a spirituality of healing. AA starts the journey to recovery in these first three steps that leads to a mystical awareness of a dynamic and personal God. The path of the healing process requires more than the mystical awareness, however. It demands the powers of the soul are activated. Spiritual awareness means that a person has experienced God's loving compassion and knows that he and she is an imperfect being. They must begin to lead a good life. In Thomistic morality, the alcoholic must go from a life of vicious behavior to a life of virtuous behavior. Morality takes a new expression when it is situated within the context of healing. You will flourish as a person if you follow these steps. You don't have to wait for the afterlife. You'll start feeling a bit of heaven in the here and now once you get rid of the hangovers. It's simple. The Thomistic morality, like a spirituality healing, is a moral psychology of healing and human flourishing. You will flourish as a human being. That's what the program brings to you, the same as morality will bring to you. Living in social harmony with others is essential to spiritual and moral and mental health. Aquinas explains the virtue of justice as being concerned with social harmony. You know, you got to be just to your friends. Friendship, concord, gratitude, affection, humanity, and benevolence as being parts of justice. Living in spiritual, moral, and social harmony with others means living by the virtue of justice and the habit of decent, clean friendship for the first time in your life. The alcoholic knows that a spiritual healing demands meticulous attention to the virtue of justice in order to return to a life of social harmony and friendship. It's just not just to be lying to everybody, your boss and wife and kids all the time. You're just not a just person at all. There is a crucial lesson for traditional religion to learn from the sincere practitioners of AA spirituality, but not religious types. Living in social harmony with others is essential to the spirituality of healing. AA makes clear that being spiritual means that an individual is able to live lovingly with others. We see this spiritual principle, social harmony, emphatically established in step 11 of the program when we are introduced, the recovering alcoholic is introduced to the prayer of St. Francis. And if AA has a creed anywhere, it's in step 11, and it's the prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Every person in the program of any length has memorized that prayer with the serenity prayer and lives by it. It goes back to the spiritual sponsor directing the unbeliever who is searching for a personal, dynamic God, to when the seeker is introduced to begin pursuing good, orderly direction. A creature increases its perfection, its distinctness, its relatedness as the creature returns closer to God who is perfect love. It is fundamental to Aquinas that a creature is ordered to other creatures. The Thomistic principles that each creature is moved by God through all others of creation. Moving toward the greater love approach. The greater love necessarily means moving away from avoiding others who would be unfitting for a person in relationship with God. As the previous speaker was talking, I was thinking of this next thing I'm going to come up with here. This is a spiritual principle as taken from Charles Sanders Peirce. It's called his neglected argument for God. The movement of the soul to God, Peirce calls reverie. It is pure play, pure amusement. I call it pondering. I have found over the years as a recovering alcoholic with others that this concept of movement describes somewhat the spiritual journey of the I'm spiritual but not religious type person. It is a sense of a pull, a force that gently and steadily leads the recovering individual to have a sense of fitting in joyfully and in harmony with life. It is best described in the following chapter of an anonymous alcoholic from the book Came to Believe, The Spiritual Adventures of AA. It's titled The Spirit Touch. At some time, perhaps in a more moderate way, nearly everyone has experienced the spirit touch of God, the fleeting feeling of insight, love, joy, and the world is right. Peace, joy, and love can be sought through quiet thinking and honest prayer. The wholeness, the new awareness that is produced affects one's relationship with God and man to a degree greater than would seem in ordinary life. Spiritual integration. AA spirituality of healing is a process that occurs by means of steady, disciplined, daily activity. It is a matter of you keep the principles and the steps will keep you. AA spirituality of healing is very much a life of habit. It is a matter of engaging in spiritual and moral exercises on a daily basis. It is a commitment to a lifetime pursuit of good orderly direction and the exercises that go with that. When the satisfaction of our desires for sex, security, and society and power becomes the sole object of our lives, then pride steps in to justify the excesses. Given the awareness of the destructive force of pride, AA spirituality of healing focuses the individual's attention to the need for the development of the habit of humility. We say in AA, for without humility, the old timers will always say, without humility, no alcoholic can stay sober at all. We must place the attention given to the deadly sin of pride and the development of the virtuous habit of humility as similar to Aquinas' concept of a person as attracted to live in harmony with God. For Aquinas, the virtue of compassion reveals the other-oriented interpersonal character of the person. A spirituality of healing is a continuous integration of intellect, will, and emotion. Mental healing, as is clear in AA, is a spirituality of attraction to proper social harmony by means of the virtuous habits of prudence, justice, fortitude, and especially, above all, humility. Alcoholics, you want to know what an alcoholic is? I'll make it very simple. An alcoholic is a person who has an ego the size of this building, mixed with an inferiority complex. That's a tough way to go through life. Moving to emotional prudence. In terms of the alcoholic living in social harmony, she is described as having a twisted and toxic moral character. As a result, the process of recovery is a spiritual healing of all the faculties of soul, intellect, will, and emotions. In the process of spiritual healing, a moral and emotional examination of the subjective experiences of the irascible emotions of fear and anger are basic and an essential requirement of early and continuous life stages of spiritual healing and requirement. It is the combination of pride justified by unconscious fears, this is straight out of AA, that leads to self-justification and the justification of moral excesses. All these failings generates fear of a soul sickness in its own right. The fear in turn generates more character defects. In the spirituality of recovery, careful and continuous attention is given to the irascible emotions of fear and anger and the lack of hope in a person's life, especially when intentional objects are evil. In terms of spiritual healing, it means that anger is in often cunning and baffling ways, the irascible emotion of anger draws the alcoholic back to that first drink. The naming and taming of anger is so important because of the moods of expressions it assumes in the life of an alcoholic, namely resentment and self-pity. We call it sitting on the pity potty, feeling sorry for myself, that life has dropped upon me. It's the greatest excuse for drinking. Especially the Irish are very susceptible to it. The mystic AA of spirituality, anger, is readily ignitable because it is aroused when a person has a sense of injustice. The alcoholic who suffers from a mental and physical and spiritual illness has not acquired the moral virtues and habits that allow him or her to tame anger. When a person lacks the spiritual and moral acumen to respond to anger, it leads to entering into moods of resentment and self-pity. And they can taste their first drink at that stage. The anger is gradually intensified the longer, and here is the critical word, the longer the individual broods over it. The brooding over the irascible emotions takes down many a good person over the cause of anger. In turn, the growing resentment leads the alcoholic to avoid the proper acts of good moral character that allow him or her to live in spiritual harmony. How am I doing on time? Am I over?
10 minutes.
Got 10 minutes left?
Yeah.
Okay. AA spirituality of healing, as we see, is a way of recovering from alcoholism by following a well-defined spiritual and moral program. It is the exercise of these principles that touches the soul of the recovering individual and leads to the transformation of moral character. The transformation is started by a determined commitment to spiritual and moral exercises that calls for trust and patience. The program of spiritual healing, which with calling for the discipline to live by principles and to abstain from alcohol on a daily basis. The power to resist alcohol and experience a transformation of character is generated from a higher power, and one starts to feel and discover the powers of the soul that leads to a spiritual movement towards a lifestyle
a virtuous habit. It is simultaneously accepted that the daily reprieve from alcohol is dependent on this spiritual condition, and the process of moral healing is most contingent on the exercise of the virtue of, here comes the big one, in recovery, and in all mental health, I think, and all management, and all leadership, and finding our way home tonight, the exercise of the virtue of prudence. It is the virtue of prudence that is essential to recovery, to the recovering alcoholic state of serenity and emotional sobriety. The virtue of prudence is presented to the alcoholic as the key to a life of harmony with God and others. As Joseph Pepper describes prudence as the foundation of all the cardinal virtues, justice, temperance, and courage. It's the charioteer of the other virtues. It is prudence that directs all other virtues. In a sense, prudence is synonymous with wisdom. Prudence is really wisdom that is activated. It is the ability to measure short-term gain against long-term gain. It looks at the destination of the recovering alcoholic in terms of the spiritual promises of a better life and appraises the present. Prudence is about making the right judgment as to the right thing to do at the right time and the right way. The recovering alcoholic has learned to manage self and others by means of the habit of prudence. Prudence requires that before we make a decision, we seek counsel. We pray that God will lead us to the right counsel where we gather the information and advice necessary to making a prudent decision that leads to proper action. God wants us to have people in our lives who will give us counsel. And just an aside, near the end of alcoholism, an alcoholic, as one guy described it to me, I was sitting out on the sidewalk. My wife had thrown me out of the house. My second company had gone broke. I'm on the curb without a job. But if you had asked me how to straighten out your life, I would have told you right away. No sense of, your whole sense of prudence, the only counsel that you would listen to, even in your most drunken stupidity. That's why in bars, you see, the mirrors are there for alcoholics. They sit at the bar and they stare at themselves, even right down to the end, because they know everything. They're invincible. It is this reason that God wants us to live in spiritual communities, to help each other with prudent counsel. It is for this reason that step 1 reads, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. We're in this together, but our lives had become unmanageable. It is for this reason that in AA, alcoholics sponsor each other on the road to recovery. And it is why recovering alcoholics continue going to meetings. 20 years without a drink, and I still go to meetings 4 times a week. And people say, geez, you still go after? I said, well, yeah, it's pretty bad drunk. The process of moral healing is contingent on the virtue of prudence. It is the virtue of prudence that is essential to the recovering alcoholic state of serenity and emotional sobriety. The virtue of prudence of the alcoholic is the key to a life of harmony with God, others, and self. The architectural plan is revealed from moment to moment in their life. The steps are not healing or mental health techniques. They're a call to a disciplined life seeking a conscious contact with the personal healing God on a daily basis. AA's concept of prudence as is applied to spirituality. Let me read a quote from the big book in AA. This is essential. I ask people that I sponsor to memorize certain pages in the book, but I ask them to memorize, this is AA's definition of prudence. Listen to it carefully. As we go through the day, not the week, not the month. This is a daily contemplative thing. Okay? As we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves we are no longer running the show, humbly saying to ourselves many times a day, thy will be done. And as we go through the day, we pause. We pause when we are when we are then in much less danger. Now, think of the irascible emotions. I'll go through this list now. Okay? We are then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, and foolish decisions. Now, let me get to this next one on the will. We'll finish up there, and I'll make a remark on how they become religious after all this. I think the miracle of AA starts when the recovering alcoholic realizes the difference in believing in God and believing in a healing God, that God can and will if he is sought. What's your criteria of truth for God? I couldn't stop without him. There must be a God. there must be a higher. I tried everything else. That's my criteria. I've become a radical consequentialist here. I mean, the night before I was going to I got arrested for a DUI, and it was my second DUI, and I had 2 attorneys, and I went to the court, you know, and my attorneys were there, and the judge was up there, and nothing was happening, and I was sitting there. My wife's going to divorce me. The kids hate me. The dogs won't even bark at me anymore, you know, and I heard the judge say, "Get him out of here. He's the luckiest guy I've ever seen," because the state trooper who was going to testify against me, who I tried to bribe the night before, you know, he had to stop at Orange, Kansas because of an accident. So they had to toss the case up. So we got in the car, and my attorney, Charlie, said, "Well, you're lucky, you know, Charlie. It's the end of luck. The luck's run out, you know." Now, the night before, I was so scared, I prayed all night. And I even found my old rosary beads. I tried that. I'll give that a whack, okay? And the next day, the charge got thrown out. See, so it worked. I'm a consequentialist, right? Pragmatic. It works. It's the most. Unfortunately, the suffering alcoholic for years has been under the delusion of self-control by means of a false understanding of willpower. This is the big one. The false understanding of willpower is best called willfulness. Prior to AA, the alcoholic is attempted under pressure to exercise brute willpower. Just stop. Unsuccessful, totally unsuccessful. The fact is, this is a quote from AA, for most alcoholics, for various reasons yet obscure, they have lost the power of choice to drink. Consequently, AA does not ask for exercises in brute willpower. Rather, he asks for willingness. Willingness is an alcoholic's ego. Willfulness is an alcoholic's ego-driven way of it's my way or the highway. Willing is concerned with the end itself. For the good man, that thing is an object of willing which is truly worthy of being willed. Those things are agreeable to the habit of those things that are agreeable to the habit of virtue. They are in fact good because the habit of moral virtue is defined by what is in accord with right reason. Willingness begins initially with faith in God, and then a willingness to listen to his will and formulate the proper ends, to live completely in sobriety and serenity. Not just getting over the booze, that's the first part. The thing that keeps you going back is you want to live the life of serenity and sobriety, one day at a time, doing the will of God. A Thomistic spiritual philosophy of recovery is about the absolute necessity of recovering our powers of intellect and will, conscious contact. The awareness of God, as AA stresses, is the purpose of healing a fallen nature. Being spiritual requires that we develop the powers of the recovery with the proper end and means. We get confused about the difference between religion and spirituality because we're not clear about the proper place of religion in the spiritual life. I have found that recovering alcoholics who have followed the spiritual steps over a number of years, which I have argued is a lifestyle of faith and virtue, come to an understanding of religion and the completion of their spiritual path. Recovering alcoholics healed from alcohol have a sense of profound gratitude to God that leads to a loving sense of justice with God for the gift of sobriety and a new life. It is my strong intuition that alcoholics who diligently practice the principles of AA develop a second moral nature. You touch the soul and it starts to get bigger, as it seems to me. As they progress in spiritual and moral pursuit of being a virtuous person, good orderly direction, the desire stirs to render to God in a more manifest manner. It is for this reason that Aquinas associates religion as part of justice. Religion is regarded as a part of justice and is distinct from the other parts of justice. For Thomas, religion is a moral virtue. It is the act of the will that comes from a grateful heart that has experienced the gift of faith, the gift of healing, and it is the highest of the moral virtues. Aquinas describes religion as the highest of the moral virtues because it keeps us balanced. We know without God we go astray easily, and this is a critical principle of the recovering alcoholic. Let me put it to you this way. Every time I walk into an AA meeting, whether who's there or it's going to be a good meeting or not, I don't care. Every time I walk through that door, I have committed an act of humility. I apply the same thing to church. Whether the guy's preaching or on or not, or what the service is going to be, I really don't care. But every time I go into that church and bend my knee, it's an act of humility to a power greater than myself. So let me finish with this. Oh, I wrote last night, trying to put all my thoughts together on this. Hold on. A spirituality of humble willingness to a devotion and habitual dedication to a God greater than ourselves demands that we lead, demands the virtue of religion eventually. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our both speakers. I think this is the time for a conversation, for a discussion. So if I may have you here, gentlemen, just in front of the camera, because we are broadcasting your answers, discussion. So please approach a little bit here. Okay, okay. Just be patient. Okay, so let me present another way. So we have Mr. Block, Mr. McVeigh. So please, I invite you to common discussion. The first questioner is Robert. This is for Professor Block. Please, John.
Sure. I enjoyed very much the paper. I was thinking about some things that Peter Redpath was saying to Curtis about one's conception of human nature. And it seems to me that this problem in the 21st century, these fights over justifying religious belief and evidentialism and all that, probably come from what's very prevalent in the academy, a very reductionist view of human beings. I think there are many philosophers, for example, who just can't see that there could be any higher way of knowing than reason. You know, the idea of grace or some other supernatural version of knowing, I think to them is foreign, so they want to reduce the problem to reason. I think that's what's motivating a lot of these problems nowadays. Would you agree with that? Or?
I think, I mean, as with a lot of these things, it depends on your definition of reason. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you that I think what earlier the word positivism was used. Right. We tend to have this idea of reason as being pure deduction, and we don't pay attention to our first principles. And faith is precisely about receiving first principles from higher being. So I would say, under a broader understanding of reason, reason is our highest power. But as regards the way most people understand reason, yes, I think people do much of it understanding reason.
Right, but faith does transcend reason, right? Just like grace perfects nature. It's above.
Right, yeah, so what faith, I think, is not receiving. It's not ours. I believe you said earlier that reason, since they don't recognize that there is a higher power.
No, the idea is that knowledge, I think, through grace, for the positivist, is something alien to him or her.
Yes.
And this is like a post-enlightenment thing, really. It's a reductionist view of the human person, and I think that's what's generating.
Yeah, so I think I would agree with you. They tend to think that the highest power of the universe is us, right? So they would
right, some human reason, not a grace reason.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on that because in his commentary on Aristotle's Thinking Key and Ethics, somewhere around the middle, St. Thomas talks about the fact that speculative philosophy and practical philosophy are species of right reason, and that they presuppose that you already know something. That speculatively you have understanding from which you get speculative principles, like non-contradiction, or simply that you know your powers and abilities to know things, unity of truth, and so on. And synderesis on the practical level. So the analogy would appear to be that faith is like the virtue of understanding, yes, and the virtue of synderesis. And unless you admit it to be known immediately, on the basis of your possession of a kind of intellectual understanding or faculty higher than the process of reasoning, like syllogistically, you have no starting point. You have no evidentiary starting point by means of which you could maintain. You know, your reasoning has a foundation in a right principle. Like you have a principle by means of which you can reason, and it's evident to the person as a formal object for that reasoning process is as the philosophical formal object is from the standpoint of natural reason. So, you think that?
Yeah, no, Aquinas explicitly makes the connection between the light of our understanding, by which we get first principles, as being analogous to the light of faith, by which we also receive first principles for us.
Yeah,
Those come from a higher
I
side.
would like to tie that into what you were talking about, though, with respect to the alcoholic and the enlargement of the soul, when you get back to first principles, because I think this is one of the things that Thomas, some people call themselves students of St. Thomas in the 20th century, largely lost total sight of. This whole presupposition about the need for first principles that are not premises, logical premises, but something larger than that, that are presupposed for the starting points of philosophical reasoning.
Here's the problem I have, not just with working with alcoholics, I have secret classes. They're interesting.
Well, maybe we should get up to the people.
I have secret classes, and the first thing they say is, you know, religion, Episcopal Church, God, it's all a big head trip. It's all about dogma and rules and stuff, you know, and you know, it's all that's head trip. It's all about you know, life. It's got to be about feelings and people and so forth. And I'll say, well, you know, the intellect isn't just about speculation. It's about practical knowledge. You know, how to be, like I said in my talk, how to be a half decent person, how to flourish, how to get things done. You know? And you know, I said, you kind of got to have some principles in life. And I say it as simple as that. And that makes sense to people. Okay, so let's start with practical understanding of yourself. You know, and so when I learned working with Peter and this concept of the intensity of the soul, you know, greater. It was Jim Shaw at Washington last October that touched upon this, and I think there was an argument with Gilson as well that, you know, once the moral character starts to develop, the good heart starts to appear, and then the intellect will follow that in due time. Okay, but I think we kind of, in our evangelism, we kind of flip-flop that around. You know, I only pride ourselves in apologetics and so forth, but I'm not yet convinced that this generation that's the way we start talking. It was interesting when Curis was talking. He said, "What?" And I asked myself, "What liberates them?" See, that's a ritualistic question. What is the nature of flourishing? And you were hitting in your paper, the heart. You know, Thomas says the heart will start to flourish, and then we'll start building on that. So the graces got almost there before we got there. That's the proper way of putting it. And that's an evangelism what we're looking for. People who are at least want to sit down and have a decent conversation about practical wisdom. Your life want to be better. That's the ground to start with right there. Like I was joking about, it's quite serious. You know, we're just going to try to be a decent person, caring for others. Let's not get too abstract, speculative at this stage. So we start with the Nicomachean ethics type of thing, that kind of conversation about the principles of life, of living, and people don't mind that. They never had their Catholicism presented in that fashion, because that's been my experience. So.
Maybe.
This is a question for Bill, and maybe Curtis or Terrence can clarify this. But I think Adler in his book understands religion as having a revelation. And religion itself as a binding to that revelation. So I'm not sure that a consequentialist interpretation of religion would fit Adler's definition or Aquinas' for that.
I was pushing. I think where the religion starts with people I see in the program who start going to church, it's like this. It's T.S. Eliot. We go back to where we started from. Something earlier in your life, you know, comes back. That's part of it, okay? But then there's others who come back to religion because it just seems like the fullness of a decent life. You know, it's as simple as that. You know? A lot of people come into AA who say, "I don't believe in God at all." You know, and I said, "Well, you're going to say your prayers anyway." And in 3 or 4 months, they'll say to me, you know, there's got to be something there. You know, there's got to be something there. And then I'll say, then, by the way, are you still on that depression medication as much as you were? When, no, I don't use that much anymore. You know, so something is, I don't know what you mean by a revelation, but something is revealing in their person. Something is stirring. Right. That's all I'm saying.
Well, maybe a follow-up question to mention, if AA jump starts the process, what about Pascal's wager? Would that jumpstart the process of belief, or would it finally say that this is just faith of the demons believing from the shrewdness of natural intellect?
Yeah. So the one thing I didn't want to give the impression of is that human reason is a bad thing, right? Because we can use our human reason to come to the preambles of that, and that is important. The only thing that I was trying to say was that isn't necessarily, that isn't necessary. That's not even a sign of perfection. It's a matter of human reason and faith, because God's revelation doesn't need that. So because God calls us to Himself in various ways, absolutely, I would say, like Pascal's wager. I mean, we're human beings. We are meant to use our human reason. Those are important and can't certainly touch our hands.
On Dr. Adler, I'm sorry, I thought you were finished. On Dr. Adler, he distinguishes between revealed religions, which are Western, and cosmological religions, which are Eastern, which are orthoprax, more about behavior than doctrinal revelation.
So it's speculative in the West versus practical in the East.
Yeah.
And so science would be a continuation of that speculative.
Right, that's why it's more intrinsic to the West.
Michael?
Thank you, Professor Block, thank you. It's great, opened my eyes to a couple of things. Have you considered the relationship between it's going to sound stupid because there's so many differences, so it's kind of focusing just on the work of the Spirit, okay? The difference between Van Til's presuppositionalism and what you're talking about?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
Yeah, do you want to explain a little bit?
No, that's okay. It's just, it fits into what you're doing.
I mean, if there's time, I'd be interested.
I'd like to do a follow-up. Well, I'll talk to you about it.
Okay, yeah, please.
I'm not an expert, okay? I'd like to do a follow-up with Bill. I don't understand why you characterize the AA program as mystic. To me, it's more Aristotelian study.
I think it's because of the emphasis on right in there, it's the emphasis. I'll read the AA literature. It's all in the moral virtues. They don't use those words. Temperance, pride, seven deadly sins, courage, humility. It's not, no, they don't. It all goes back to the cardinal virtues. And the exercise of willingness and willfulness.
But there's an undefined God. There's no forgiveness in Christ. Religion is amorphous.
There's an undefined God in a speculative way, but not in the way of practical understanding. That's the key difference. Good moral order through living the life of virtue will lead eventually to this way. You're free to define your own definition. There is no definition. You are given a set of spiritual exercises that will lead you to keep constantly refining your own personal definition. And for many, that will lead going back to church. Yeah. So that's the process of it. I think that's the genius of the program that's put together. But you are living, but the key that runs all the way through the program are the cardinal virtues. So you can't miss that in the literature. It's a program fundamentally of moral transformation. That's why I sat there and said, people say it's a spiritual trend. But the mystical awareness thing is not the thing that keeps you sober. It's those daily exercises of living by virtuous habit. And that's about as hardcore to mystic as it comes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I have a question. I'm curious to see if it changes anything in your approach, if we distinguish between, in a sense, a spontaneous use of reason, which is somehow necessary to our being human and acting as humans, and the reflective use of reason, which we might use when we have doubts, when we, for example, as in the passage you mentioned by Aquinas, we need reason in order to believe in God. But if we focus on the angle of faith, the angle of faith, from the viewpoint of this spontaneousness, even the existence of God is a necessary knowledge. Aquinas talks about it very often. Even our first knowledge of moral principles that we use to identify, for example, Jesus as telling the truth about morality. But even to believe in God, in the authority of God, we need to understand who God is, and we are using our reason for it. So in a sense, the authority of God is understood by our spontaneous reasoning. For example, we see the miracle in God. Jesus himself identifies himself with St. John, using the miracles as a sign of his being who he is, right? So it's not like John or his disciples are putting in doubt anything, but that knowledge, which is the reasoning knowledge, spontaneous, is a precondition of the act of faith. So in a sense, I find very often this ambiguity in the talk about faith. I wonder whether it changes.
Yeah, I'm not sure that changes anything. Like I try to clarify, I'm not saying that reason is not involved. And yeah, obviously, even prior to the act of faith, there's going to be some reasoning judgment. What I was objecting to was solely this idea that it's human reason alone that can make the judgment. This is God or the person. But as for whether human reason is involved, yeah, I think it certainly is prior to the act of faith. Yeah. So yeah, I would agree with that.
I have a question. I had a question about the devils and their recognition of faith on the one hand, but their inability to have the will accepted, and the relationship that this has to the notion of the end as a principle, and in which you delight, as connected with happiness. So while would you say that the intellectually is this conviction, right? But there can be no pleasure, there can be no enjoyment in the conviction on the part of the fallen spirits, which they're confirmed in, that they can never, even though they know this is to be the truth, they can never experience that delight. And if you are then a being that does experience that delight, is precisely the relationship of that experience of the enjoyment, right? In the recognition that is known intellectually beyond reason, as a kind of intellectual satisfaction, like the possession of happiness, and say as a property of the being. St. Thomas would say, happiness must involve the experience of pleasure, but in this sense of intellectual joy.
Yeah, no, I think that is true. I think, yeah, I don't want to go too far into the speculation. I have to separate what Aquinas says from what my thinking about this. But yeah, faith is the substance of things hoped for, and evil spirits don't have the beings of conviction. So I think there is something they're missing. It's not, so yeah, they know God's revealed the Trinity, presumably, they know that Jesus is God, because they've been able to see these miracles because they're very true. So they can know that these truths are revealed and that they're true, but they don't see the goodness of that. And
I find no enjoyment in it.
Yeah, which seems to be missing a part of what that is. And faith is that foretaste of that actual vision of God. And so it seems to be that they are missing a part of the truth, it seems to me. I'm not quite sure how to word that, because yes, they know it's true, but yeah, they definitely don't see everything that some of the faith does.
But that touching of a sense of happiness and pleasure, beyond all human description. I think it's what Charles Sanders Peirce was talking about, this concept of music, or that thing about that touch, in life, where there's something beyond all human understanding of pleasure and happiness. It's greater than we touch it in this life. And that's what you're getting at. But it's something that the devil can never comprehend. You'll never have that touch, even that momentary touch of pleasure, and even a fallen human being under grace is capable of that, which would truly be the sin of the spirit. Yeah.
Please.
So I thought for Bill, it's very interesting to talk about the irascible appetites being tied into this. And that sounds dead on. In discussing that, the point says that the irascible part of an appetite, how we can translate it, the subject of spiritual concupiscence and private life, discussing true ways of going astray. And so, this makes a lot of sense. Here's the thing that I was interested in hearing from you. Is there something in particular that the alcoholic who is struggling with anger is particularly angry at? Something that runs throughout it, or is it just sort of, when you have divisive anger, one way it can happen is while you just get angry in indiscriminate ways. That's one way you can go wrong. But with others, there seems to be something that pattern.
Here's what I recommend. The one psychiatrist, who really came closest to understanding AA was Conrad Barthes. And I've got his book that you want to see later on psychic wholeness. And his whole treatment on, he bought into the Freudian view of repression, but he didn't buy it as sexual repression, but he brought it into, he said the two causes of repression are in the irascible emotions, okay? Fear and anger and the struggle with hope and so forth. But he builds several different neuroses of fear that go in. So fear and anger is a very complex thing. For example, I'm counseling somebody. They'll come up with all kind of great intellectual arguments, about why they want to go back, and I'll listen to them for about 15 minutes. I'll say, "You're mad. You're really an angry person." What? And they go, "Well, I'm mad about this." And I say, "No, let's get down to the root cause of your anger and your lack of hope in life." So you're angry because you can't drink anymore. There's the anger. Let's face that and say, "Yeah, you're right. I'm angry." And then they hang up and then they feel better. That's why we say, if you feel like a drink, you call. I remember one time I was in the program for about 5 years, and I hadn't been going to enough meetings, and business was getting very successful, so I was feeling I was ready for the lecture tour. And I was working for a company, and I just hated the boss I was working with, a husband and wife company, and we're in San Jose at a meeting, and I did everything to mess the meeting up, make her look stupid because I was leaving for another job, and I just forgot all my principles that given day. And we were having dinner at a country western bar. And I loved country western bars, and I loved to listen to country western music and get drunk. And get angry, maybe start a fight if I could, I don't know what I was angry about, but that was just what you did when you were doing cowboy drinking, we're going to kick some butt tonight, You're in that mood. All the unconscious fear, and I don't know what it was caused. My father was an alcoholic, the Jesuits beat the hell out of me and all that kind of stuff. It's all there, it's all run through my somatic system and so forth. Some Jack Daniel would have been the first guy that crosses me. And so I said, I can't drink, I'm not drinking. So I went back to my room, and I called it the AA number, and I got another alcoholic on the phone. And I'll never meet the guy again. And I said, I'm going to go out and drink tonight and get in trouble. He said, okay. And he talked to me. He said, what's that going to solve? I said, how are you going to feel tomorrow? Just a few. But something happened within the 5 or 10 minutes of talking to a friend. You see, the grace of a friend. There's something here, Just an aside, I was listening to Father today talk about his mission. When you went to the Indians and they waited for you guys coming, it was like our friends are coming. That concord of friendship. There's a grace in friendship. It's like a sacrament, I think, And you are my friends. I call you my friends. I take that part of Scripture very seriously. But just the talking, the anger disappeared. We didn't have to go into in-depth analysis of it. So, yes, you will spend the rest of your, and what happens in recovery, And the spiritual life, I think, is you're 10 years working your spiritual life, and then all of a sudden, I'll give you one more story. I'm 16 years in the program, getting older. I end up at a meeting that's a meeting of alcoholics, Al-Anon, and they all got their black belt, you know. Al-Anon, they don't like alcoholics. And they had, for the first time, I met children of dependent alcoholics. And this young kid started talking about the problems of being raised by an alcoholic father. I had a vicious alcoholic father. I hadn't thought about that anger for years. I left the meeting and walked over to a park and sat there and cried for a half an hour, you see. It took years, but it had to come out, not with a shrink or anywhere. It was when the Holy Spirit was ready for me to face it, and it was with a group of loving friends, okay? So the depth analysis isn't that important, because it seems to me in spiritual recovery, when the Holy Spirit wants to come out, the right person, the right counsel, the right deliberation will be there, okay? And as I always say to people, you know, this isn't costing you $250 an hour, it's costing you $1 a meeting to have loving friends. And that's why I'm such a big fan of small parishes and churches, you know, for people who have been in that friendship and community for, I mean, they got all that faults in the world, but they are our friends. There's something sacramental in friendship. So I don't know if I answered your question or not. But there are different types of fears, and I think you could, bars I'm fascinated. We can talk some more about that. Yeah.
Bars or convent bars?
Convent bars. Convent bars. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Something for Bill. You talked about so many alcoholics are know-it-alls. And
they're all know-it-alls.
yeah, all the alcoholics I've known are certainly know-it-alls.
They are.
Yeah. Now, the other day I saw a bumper sticker in traffic that said, hire a teenager while they still know everything. I'm wondering, that's why I was asking the chicken and egg question. Do they have an arrested development? Are they like teenagers that still know it all? And that's why they become alcoholics? Or does the alcoholism revert them back to the arrested development?
Here's one. I was sponsoring this attorney, and he said, here's the problem that happened to me. He said, in college, I was drinking with all my buddies in the fraternity. We're having a great time. Okay, they all graduated. They got on with their life, but I kept on drinking and partying like I was still in college. Okay, so there is a thing. I think there's a real problem today. As I call late in adolescence. Some people never get out of high school and never get out of their college days. And I think the drinking and all that, the play. But again, Dunnington is a book I recommend Curis on alcohol. He argues that one of the things with the alcoholic is he is fundamentally an extremely lonely people. Bill Wilson, even after all his years in AA, said he still missed at times the frivolity and the play of his buddies at the bar. So that sense of, I'm so close that I can, isn't it interesting, we're on a plane, we sit beside a stranger and we'll pour ourselves out. And we have this need for people that we can trust and love and share our feelings and our fears with. And that's being replaced today with neuroscience and professional therapy and so forth.
St. Thomas talks about the three prime examples of hope. Young people's uncles in school. Because young people tend to live in the future, not the past. They don't have enough experience of living, be frustrated, and have the right estimation of their abilities. The fool, because the fool overestimates the abilities and the dangers, and the drunkard really gets these mood swings, and hence that this grandiose sense of power. And all this is related to this estimated sense, in which the irascible appetite is located. I think the irascible appetite is located in the estimated sense. The concupiscible is located in the common sense. And this is why they function in different ways. And that's why you have to have subordination of the concupiscible appetite to the irascible under the estimated sense to have prudential judgment. Because then you have right estimation of power. And if you don't have, if you have the grandiose estimation of power, the exaggerated sense of soul, then this influences your ability to make right choices.
because choice depends upon doing what's possible. Under exaggerating sense of possibility.
That hope is also a theological virtue, so are we all fools?
Well, but then the end is different, and that kind of hope is not located in the estimated sense. That's located in the.
And I just underline that Peter and I have been working together on these good videos. I'm following carefully. And I've been working for the different Nicaean ethics as well. And this thing of the estimated sense, the estimated sense related to prudence has become bigger and bigger as we've been going through it. And it has staggering clinical implications, I think. And it has staggering implications for pastoral counseling and theology, that this estimated sense of people. And certain people, it's almost like they've lost their estimated sense today. They're in touch with reality and common sense. So this is a huge.
This is where common sense. When people generally talk about common sense, this is what the faculty that's in our elements and comments they actually get to.
Yeah. Because anger, when discussing the rationality of anger, Thomas has this remarkable block saying that if you're talking about how people are wrong, if they're only partly wrong, they can still be angry because they're still partly wrong. But they're really, really wrong. Now they can't be angry. That's not to go against our experience. We see people who are angry because that drunk.
When you get that drunk, everything stops. You're catatonic. You pass out. I mean, for years I never fell asleep.
Yeah.
I passed out every day. So that's what happened. You reach that state where you cross the line where you're less than a human being. You're no longer human. All the faculties are shut down. But you're in a stupor. You're an ethicist. So you shut down the psyche pretty well. I've never done cocaine, but I've worked with cocaine addicts. That's what happens on meth and cocaine. In reality, you are now. They think they are the beatific vision. They have hit a sense of. So you hit a point where the whole human faculty, you just shut down completely. There's a line you cross.
You're still moving.
It's a progressive disease too. That happens.
Yeah. I mean, you're still, you're not in the cat time. You're still moving sexually.
You're still angry. You're still angry. Well, just try to pick up the drunk on the street. The first drunk is one of the angry. It's an angry animal. That's it.
Other points? Let's relax. Time. Thank you very much.
Give me a second to reset the.
Okay. Terry Barrett says, I suggested that we take a half-hour break now rather than after the next session. That might be good. Give people a chance to
Sure,
rest.
then we just go right into that.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good idea.
All right, we're going to take a half-hour break now for those of you watching, and we're going to resume at it's half an hour from now. 3:30, 4:30 Eastern Daylight Time.